Good evening. Good evening. Welcome if you are here with us in the Day Museum and the campus of Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, or if you're joining us remotely. It is great to have you with us. Welcome if you're joining us again and have returned to conversation, or if you're joining us for the first time. And a special welcome tonight. You have made the right choice, given a few choices of what to do tonight, including a vice presidential debate. So the fact that you are here, we celebrate even more so. We will all later catch up on the vice presidential debates. But the conversation that brings us together today is a continuation. For the last couple of weeks, if this is your first session tonight, we encourage you to go back and look at the recordings of our first two sessions. And we will have one more next week as we conclude the series on disruptive AI, Christian nationalism, and democracy. Next week, we will also be hosting a small reception in the beginning at 5:30. So if you'd like to join us a little bit earlier, have a chance to visit with those who have been presenting and discussing, having a little bit more time for that conversation, we hope that you can do that, and we'll begin that at 5:30 next Tuesday. We're excited to go back to the conversation tonight. Again, a background briefly on this series. The Earl Lectures began at Pacific School of Religion in 1901. So it's been running for a bit. It is one of the longest running lecture series in California. This is the first time that we are returning to an in-person component to the series. And so we're delighted that as we try to remember how to do things in person and in hybridity, that you are helping us to figure that out. But the series has committed to the engagement publicly around discussions of various social issues in the world as they relate and engage also with the religious traditions of the world. How do we think about the big picture questions and issues that matter to us? The discussions of this series certainly are critically important. As we gather here tonight, we do so on a day that marks the escalation of conflict in the Middle East as it spreads into Lebanon, and the fear as 40,000 military personnel from the United States are located in the region. We gather here together as a hurricane of unprecedented scope has stormed through the eastern United States, devastating huge numbers of communities. All of these issues and many other conflicts around the world and challenges that we have create fissures within our communities and challenge our ability to collaborate, to live with one another, to find ways to speak across difference. In our first couple of series presentations, we have discussed both the possibilities of AI to help us advance our understanding and knowledge, land our planes, but also the risks of the kind of polarization that AI and other mathematical systems can do as they exacerbate our biases, our ways of being and accumulate power to certain communities with more access. We have also engaged on the important role that religious traditions have played to make meaning and make sense of the world, but also acknowledge the way that those systems, just like systems of AI that try to make meaning and understanding, can also divide, and specifically have focused on the rise of Christian nationalism as an example also of other forms of religious extremism and nationalisms that combine an understanding of what it means to be community with ideologies and tries to privilege certain forms of ideologies. So the conversation that brings us together tonight are critically important to the work that we do. As part of our community here, we engage in the discussions, and I'm delighted to welcome back for tonight's presentation, John Robichaux, who is the Executive Director of the Fung Institute at UC Berkeley. This is a leadership program for engineering students that focuses extensively on the work of engineering solutions for social problems. We are the respondent tonight and engaged in the conversation will be Professor Leonard McMahon here from Pacific School of Religion, who teaches in the areas of spirituality and political theology. There's more information about our presenters in the pamphlets or in the handouts that were handed out as you came in and also available online. By your places are cards where you can begin to think about questions you would like to have engaged as we come to the second part after the presentations. And so we encourage you to begin writing those. You might bring questions from your disciplines, from your ideas already, so you begin to sketch those in. whenever you're ready to offer a question, you can just raise it and somebody will come and get it from you so we can collect them for the speakers to engage at the end. If you are online, you can place your questions in the chat. You can also use the chat to let us know if you're having any issues technologically, being able to hear us, or anything else with the presentation, and we'll try to address the concerns you may have. Again, thank you for being with us tonight, and please join me in welcoming John back to the podium.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'll say, by way of kicking off, that the topic of religion and democracy in particular is, for me, a topic that's been important for more than a couple of decades in my life. So some of the things you'll see tonight really go back to days when, when Hamas was first elected democratically into power some time ago, thinking in the aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, how it is that we ought to have been thinking about democracy, or building a pluralistic religious democracy, a democracy as pluralist in its religious content or religious citizenry. And challenges that came around when the Swiss banned minarets, or here in California, before the Supreme Court had made marriage equality the law of the whole land, where marriage equality was something that was taken away via SB 8 here. And so it's really that set of questions in the early aughts that led me down the questions that you'll see today exhibited around religion and politics, religion, democracy, and the like. The AI portion is going to be building on what we've already done in the series, so I'll remind us where we are, and then be giving you at least a few more ways in which AI is accelerating the conversation, and then finally want to close with reflection on religious nationalism's particular challenges to religion, to democracy, and then in this age of AI as well. So, reminder that I'm speaking for myself here, not being a student from Berkeley, so don't get me in trouble. Firstly. And then, again, religion, democracy, we'll talk about AI, and then the national challenge. So, setting the stage. Firstly, let me just set two terms on the table for us here. Tonight, when I'm talking about political or politics, what I'm really talking about is the legal framework that allows someone to access the coercive enforcement power of the state. Tax, police, military, and the like. When I'm talking about the non-political realm, it's really everything else that lacks that enforcement power. And that's a robust part of our lives. That's the freedom of association that we tend to have. That's the discourses we have online. That's jobs, that's economy, and the like. There are interesting dimensions on democracy, AI, and nationalism in those realms as well. But really, I want to focus tonight on the acquisition of the coercive power of the state. So the political as that coercive power. All right, so two familiar principles if you're familiar with the US, but also elsewhere in the world on the democratic front. The constitutional non-establishment of religion. In the US, that's one of our First Amendment features. In the US, we also often talk about this Jeffersonian wall between church and state. We know, and you may have heard, that that is often a point of criticism by religious nationalists today, saying that was made in a letter that's not really principle. So, what I want to do is I want to walk you through three problems that animate my thinking about the wall of separation, the supposed wall of separation. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that religions often don't care about the wall, if you're interested in that wall. And so, for me, this starts with the fact of pluralism. We live in a world where some religious communities are interested in that wall, some aren't, and some are willing to negotiate. So religious practices don't always agree that religious communities should remain outside of politics or should not seek the power of the state, which is both talking in a joint session of Congress, Supreme Court justices from the U.S. included. So within that range of pluralism, religious approaches take a wide range of stances. So I always remind people that with regard to any religious practice or preference for the political, the religious individual or religious community might be open to compromise, partially open to compromise, or not open to compromise at all. Where compromise here is concerning the coercive power of the state. should we pursue our preference in politics? Second problem, we actually may want some religion in our politics. In fact, many of us do. You may recognize this image, or this collection of images, from the first lecture, which was on a slide about religious civil disobedience, and how I mentioned that many of us grew up in communities that idolized King and Gandhi and Harry Tubman and others for their religious engagements in politics, for what they did for the democratic project, writ large. So we may actually want some religion in politics. And this has been the problem that's animated me for some time. With regard to religion and democracy, I'm effectively aiming to pursue a principled way to navigate between Dr. King and the KKK. How is it? So when I came to the conversation of religion and democracy, religion and politics, on the one hand had inclusionists who said we should include religion in politics. Look at King, look at Rabbi Heschel, here I read, look at others. And on the other hand, that exclusionist saying, no, religion can't be in politics, really wanting to hold that wall of separation. Look at the KKK, look at the Taliban, and the like. And so for me, I thought they both had a reasonable point with regard to democracy, and I wasn't seeing a real principled way to negotiate between them. And so that was a project that I took on during my time at Harvard. Third problem. Third problem is not really democracy itself, or democracy in the broad sense, but focuses on the democratic structures, which often in reality have weak protections. And they're very hackable, picking up on the AI term, or computer term, they're very hackable by religious nationalists. So the democratic structures aren't always built to withstand the onslaught of a nationalist engagement, religious or otherwise. Secondly, and I'm going to go through a couple of these tonight, there really are competing narratives about democracy that are at play, many of which you have heard, many of which also commingle with each other and are not often thought about day to day because we're living our lives. So I really want to separate a couple, three types of narratives about democracy that I think shape this conversation. So three competing models of democracy, and then about some religion and democracy. Religion and nationalism. First of all, many of us grew up with many of us who grew up in a democratic society will be familiar with, majority rule principle, or a version of democracy, the civics rule. We also, once we got on in our civics education, may have come across concerns about majority rule as being really a tyranny of the majority. Here, politics is viewed primarily as power. It increases conflicts on the religious nationalism front. Majority rule was actually a big problem in the Northern Ireland conflict, where there was just about 51% of one religious community that voted in a bloc, and about 48% of the other. It was always in the minority, exacerbating the conflicts of the day. Usually we understand this to be harming to minorities, and there's a weak judicial check here, because whatever the majority says is the way we think about democracy. The second one, communitarian. This one you will know as a claim around our shared values. We are a Christian nation. We are a Muslim people. We are a Jewish state. Commonality here is emphasized. It's often fictionalized, diminishing the differences. What does it mean when the Christian nationalists today that we see say we're a Christian nation and we want to institute Christian values in law? What does it mean when the Taliban takes power in Afghanistan, not a democratic situation, of course, but takes irreligious nationalist views and achieves the secures the coercive power of the state? They're diminishing the fact that that's not the way those religious communities in their broad diversity would actually want to rule or choose to rule. So there's a fictionalized commonality here. There's often thicker political value sets and more things that we want to put into law, and again, weak judicial checks. This is the favored preference of or view of democracy for nationalists. We are this type, and this is how we should be. You're hearing this a lot in this election cycle right now, in the US and elsewhere. All right, third model of democracy then, various names for this. Today I'm calling it a pluralist variant of democracy. Notice I'm not calling it a liberal. Notice, although you will hear things that sound like a classic liberal position, but I also push beyond that in a few ways that I think I hope will be helpful to us as we go forward. So, first of all, the pluralist version of democracy accepts the fact of pluralism, and it says that freedom and equality are the most important in the political realm. But that's it. Everything else that's non-political, or most things that are non-political at that point, are things where you can go on with your religious differences, with your different life choices. And that's really emphasized in the pluralistic view, that primarily the purpose of the state, vis-a-vis religion, or our most deeply held convictions, is to allow a very wide playing field, so that more types of individuals and communities can flourish, practice, choose, find, explore, convert, change, hold fast, whatever. So I love the image here that we're not either individuals, although sometimes that's the case, we're not only different types of communities all going in different ways, but we're allowed the free associations and paths between them. And so for those of you who know this one well, you will recognize that minority protections are a must for this version of democracy, and it requires a strong judicial set of checks. So a large part of my work on the religion and democracy front has been talking and working with minority communities around the world to say, how is this going to function for you when we're really trying to make broad possibilities within political life and limit the power for nationalists and others to acquire the power, coerce the power of the state. So, in politics, it's pluralist, but not necessarily in other areas of life. You want to be, very liberal, very not progressive. For example, in your religious communities and like, you have the flexibility in the pluralist version of democracy. It's just in the personal power of the state that you don't get that option. Now, I'll show you in a second that sometimes nationalists, though, like to play with this. And so I'm underscoring now that practitioners are not forced to be pluralists outside of the political realm. There's a big exception in the United States around public accommodations and businesses and civil rights. So I'll note that here, remind you that today I'm primarily sticking with the political and not going into those other nuanced areas too. Okay, so negotiating between these two. What's a principled way to think about religion and democracy? 3 principles, as I suggest, or that I want to recommend to us. First of all, religious ideas are to be heard in pluralist democratic discourse. This is one of the places where the pluralist version differs from classic liberalism, which says religious language and religious ideas are not welcome in the political sphere because we're supposed to be outside our religious when we're talking about politics, outside of our religious selves. So, proposal here is that religious ideas are heard, and then they're only accepted into the political realm if they represent the core democratic principles, freedom and equality. So that's how we get to let King, the abolitionist, and the like make a religious argument, not even have to ask them to translate it into a secular or a public language, as classic liberalism would ask them to do, and because they're helping us better understand our core principles of greatest freedom within the bounds of equality for a pluralistic society, then that argument can have access to the coercive power of the state, because it's advancing that core principle set, showing us where we're faltering on the pluralist or democratic ideal. And then KKK, Taliban don't get access for the same reasons. This last bullet is a bit of a piece here that I haven't mentioned. I've only alluded to here. So for a lot of the classic liberal phase of democracy, There's an idea that you had to step out of your religious language and step into a secular, often philosophized, rational state when you're making your arguments about the state or about politics. So it's been some time now that inclusive democratic theorists have said, but wait, that privileges a certain type of speech, which often preferences, or is often better expressed by certain types of people, well-educated, those who can speak in rational language, things like this. And then, with preponderance among white folks in this country, among highly educated and the like. And so you're making huge exclusion for the way people actually talk in society, or actually make compelling arguments, how they tell their stories. Art, music, dance, poetry. We know all these things really well in the religious sphere, right? So there's a large body of literature in the democratic theory space which says we should let that type of language flourish. But when I came to it, they had not yet really pushed into the religious sphere. So my addition here to that body of inclusive democratic discourse is to say, and religious language may just be another type of democratic discourse. And then we who hear each other and are trying to understand each other in poetry and song, in religious speech, in metaphor and the like, we measure it against the freedom and equality standard for pluralistic democracy. So I'm hoping, so here, those are the two, the first and the last in particular, are places where my proposal on pluralistic democracy really differs from classical liberal thought on democracy. And then again, for any given idea, or any given community, or any given individual, you would be wholly, partially, or not at all open to compromise. Foundational principle, pluralistic democracy is primarily about domination reduction, notice not elimination. So religious terrorists, religious nationalists on this view are not actually permitted to have the power of the state. You're trying to reduce domination as much as possible to create that wide playing field. Not easy, but also creates a real complaint by the nationalists. You're excluding us. Yes, yes. Sorry. Okay. Enter AI. So AI and democracy here. I promised at least one of these slides to you in this first session, but let's begin by reviewing where we're at in the series. So already in the series, these 8 things we've talked about in one way or another between the first 2 sessions. So on the upside, AI and democracy has tools for greater understanding, tools for shared practices, tools for shared advocacy, can provide tools for greater human action. On the downside, we've highlighted the surveillance and forced compliance that can happen because of AI, disinformation, diminishing human thoughtfulness and engagement. It's a particular thing that Dean Abraham emphasized, and then AI tools do allow for nationalist cultivation, connection, and movement support. So reminder, these are things we've talked about, go back and review the videos if you need, and there are others you would probably pick up as you watch them as well. So tonight I'm just going to add 4 places where AI is adding to this list that we haven't talked about yet, that I'd like you to at least be aware of, because there are many ways in which this is both impacting the nationalist conversation, but can also be useful for those of us who think about religious practice and communities as well. So AI and participatory democracy. There are tools right now that are helping large modern democracies increase democratic participation across populations that are in the many millions and beyond. So AI tools today are a place where, in some countries, you engage in conversations about policy, about practice, and the like, and the AI can, in their case, more or less accurately, engage in transcripting, provide summaries, do some word clouds, do some analysis, etc. It gets passed up to policymakers and shared out to those who are participating across regions. Really important because we don't live in Greek city-states anymore with our neighbors being the citizen discourse, the people with which we're engaged in conversation. It's not this small of a room, it's not those of us online, it's a global or certainly a broad reach in terms of democratic conversation. Taiwan's example here is poll.is. 12 million users, half the population engages in democratic policy conversation today through an AI system in Taiwan. For those of you who are in large religious denominations that are trying to make broad geographic decisions or decisions with community input, this is a potential toolkit that can be used beyond the political as well in the religious decision-making process. On the flip side of that, AI bots are able to obscure public opinion because they can and are being used right now to inundate public comment opportunities. In the US in particular, we get a lot of this, including international interference campaigns that are flooding our local, state, and federal public comment opportunities, and the AI bots can really obscure then what citizens are really saying or how they really feel. There's a weapon on that side too. With regard to this, the administration of democracy, AI is able to help us better identify ideal polling locations, help us with district mapping, do some policy analysis, word analysis for what wording should actually show up on the ballot. You may know that's a big political fight every time. AI can help us on those fronts. It is helping various communities right now. And then this research just got published this month. I've never given AI a presentation that's the same. And sure enough, this month, we have fresh research published in the journal Science that AI is actually able to help combat extremist views, at least right now. So on the right side of this list, you'll see gray dots and gray lines. The participants in the study engage in talking with the AI about various conspiracy theories, some of which you may recognize by their monikers, the moon landing, MLK assassination, September 11th, and the like. The red dots on the left are where people's opinions changed after engaging in a conversation with AI. The Economist, in their cheeky way, in reporting this article, pointed out that this looks promising for now because they worry that the trust in AI systems may be depleted over time. So for now, we're releasing initial research that suggests that some of the worries that Abraham and others particularly had about what AI can do to inflame nationalism and extremism, we also have a toolkit that may be able to help us reduce some of those extremist views as well. Okay, so the nationalist challenge in particular, religious nationalist challenge. So AI has expanded the toolkit, but it's both for those who are nationalists and those who are pluralists. And yet there remain really powerful narratives for religious nationalists who want to tug on them. So I've given you a few here. I've already flagged for you the majoritarian and the communitarian versions of democracy. Great havens if you're a religious nationalist want to pull on it. Religious pluralism, complaining that political religious pluralism or political pluralism requires religious communities to suddenly be tolerant. Here's the head cartoon. You've got the tolerance police. They love to conflate the political and the non-political, make it sound like the tolerance police are coming for you. There's a competing understanding of freedom. So there's both the negative freedom of, we don't want to be, in the pluralist version, we're freeing people, we're trying to reduce domination, trying to provide choice, freedom for more choices. In the religious nationalist context, they're taking our freedom to be full citizens and our freedom to be advocate for the things we want. So on the negative and positive versions of freedom, there are competing narratives that are compelling and being told to switch minds. Okay. Religious nationalists also pull on the tribe, with the tribe string. And I already flagged for you, in a pluralist version of democracy, there are real limits on what nationalists have access to. So they have real complaints, legitimate complaints. You should expect, and we should expect, them to pursue and fight back. That's reasonable. And then there's always this thing that makes me a little crazy. There's this alleged hypocrisy of political pluralists, which says, hey, you claim to be liberal, but you're really illiberal because you're being intolerant of us. You're not really as tolerant as you say you are. And of course, when it comes to the coercive power of the state. Be as illiberal, be as intolerant as you want, everywhere else, anywhere else. Don't get the power of the state in this version of democracy. Look her away from it. For many of you who are inside religious communities, there's often an appeal at this moment to be thinking about, hey, look, shouldn't we just convince them that Jesus really said this, or this is really how Islam ought to be promoted or lived, et cetera, and that it's the intra-religious work to which a lot of religious adherents want to then go. That's how we're going to solve this problem. We're going to convince them. And all I want to do here is just remind folks that actually those religious differences are at base where we often land in terms of religious diversity. So I don't view this as the ultimate refuge. Go convince all the great people you want to be more pluralist and less nationalist. But we should not expect, and it'd be wrong to expect, that that's always going to work. And I particularly get frustrated when folks try and brush those terrorists or nationalists away, think they're not truly religious. If you're in a religious community, that's a doctrinal claim, that's a dogmatic claim. I'm advising a policy, or a policy advisor, or a legislator, or a president, or a prime minister. It's all religion. And I've got to be able to think, I have to be able to think that way as I'm doing the work of thinking about law. If you're in the religious community, feel free to make that claim. For many of us, it's just not possible. You have to recognize that there are expressions of religion that are violent and not nationalist. Okay, so key takeaways, wrapping up. Genuine religious practice does often include political ends. Can't say that religion doesn't really include politics, it often does. Democracies do have tools and reasons to include and exclude religious communities and practices and contributions. My proposal is we can do that generally in a principled way. When democratic structures are permissive, and that's the danger we're living in right now, where in the US, do we have sufficiently strong judicial checks? Do we have a system that will sufficiently protect the pluralist version of democracy, or does it allow, as democracies often do, allow majoritarian, communitarian folks to bleed in, to hack the system, remember the weak democratic structures I mentioned? AI has this great potential to help and harm, and I gave some more examples here. AI is giving nationalists, but also those who oppose them, powerful tools as they compete on the stage. And nationalists do have a powerful, if distorted, in many cases, story to tell. So if you take away two things from tonight, I want you to think about religion's trifold relationship with democracy. That pluralist democracy is, with regard to religion, it is exclusionary sometimes. It is inclusionary and should be sometimes. And sometimes it's merely restrictive. We just changed a little bit about how we practice our religion, and it fits. And I've got plenty of examples there that we can talk about if you want in the Q&A. And then finally, this is a bit of an addendum here, and it leads into next week's conversation on leadership. But I also want to begin to test this idea that democracy, in a pluralist sense, is fundamentally other-directed. And I want to propose this for two reasons. One, I think it's accurate, because when we're talking about the question of politics in a pluralist democracy, we're really asking how we, who don't agree on the best things in life, or our religious convictions, or how we all live, how we're going to get through this together. So it's the we together, not the me. One. Two, so much of democratic conversation and political talk today is, I'm going to vote my self-interest. Well, my self-interest sounds an awful lot like majoritarian and communitarian versions of democracy, and rarely will fit with pluralism. So I'm often actually voting against my self-interest because, in a pluralist sense, I don't want the war of all against all. I don't want religious nationalism. But if you still need a self-interested argument, there is that one that still exists, which is anytime I, or we, try and appropriate the coercive power of the state on religious grounds that are outside the freedom and justice principles, the road, when we want to go rogue on our principles. Just remember that your adversaries can do that too. Right? And so this is the rule I always give from students, which is think about the thing you absolutely want the most as an individual, as a believer, as a community that doesn't quite fit freedom and equality principle set for pluralist democracy, and you would love to get it through, but if you get it through, think about the absolute worst thing that your adversary can do and what they can get through. Democratic systems and structures are not often set up like this with sufficient protections. So the way we choose to live, to vote, to organize, to talk about democracy, about religion, about nationalism, is really going to be the thing that's determinative here. And that's the challenge for us. And that's why next week's topic is on leadership. Looking forward to your questions. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much, John, for, it's okay, we're doing technology work here, it's all right. Thank you so much for that beautiful exposition and that introduction to democracy in a certain way. And I gotta say, as a scholar, I can see some of the theoretical background there. I'm gonna try not to drop names. It's very hard for a scholar not to drop names, and you hear theories and things. But I try not to do that. But thank you very much. I also want to just remind folks that if you care to offer questions later, please, during the session, please remember you can write them on your paper. You hold the sheet up and it'll be collected and then filter through. They will show up on the screens, both for us here in the room and for those watching. So for those watching online, please put your questions in the chat. So thank you. Okay, we've got a few minutes here, and also want to remind folks, I'm going to be, it's not because I'm disinterested, I'm not checking the debate. I actually am just checking the time to make sure, so transition to a Q&A session. Okay, so I have to say, what I want to do, you have a very beautiful, neat, aesthetically pleasing presentation. But what I want to do is mess it up a little bit. I want to mess it up. So it's a very nice, I'll name it as a triangle. So disagree with any of this description. You have, the state, and you have civil society, the sort of private realm, and then you have AI, and how AI is interacting in these various ways. That seems to be the sort of triangle. What I want to name, and I think you hint at it, but seem to want to keep away from it, is the impact of the market on all of this. It's very foundational for the work we do here at PSR and the work you're doing at Fung. So I have three premises. I want to offer you three premises. Feel free to disagree with any of them at any point, but three premises to set the tone. Premise one. At PSR, for example, we teach that you cannot do theology without the body. Cannot do theology without thinking about the bodies that are talking about God. Right? The way we know God is through the body. It's the only way we know. Similarly, the way we know AI is in its embodiment in the market. The only way we know AI is through our participation in the market and our consumption of AI through the various goods and services. So either directly as consumers, like for my phone, or indirectly. I think air traffic control has been mentioned a few times in this lecture series, right? So, I buy a plane ticket and the price of that AI technology is baked into the price of the ticket. So that's premise one. Premise two. For the last 40 years, given the predominance of neoliberal supply-side economics in the market, which contains two things, capital and labor. Capital has won out. It's predominant in the market. So owners, and even those workers who at the higher end tend to become like owners, it's a little murky up there as you get to the higher end of the pay scale, you know, stocks and buybacks and all that kind of thing. It gets a little sticky. But owners versus the majority of workers, labor, it's been a lopsided development. Globalization has led to that. And now AI threatens to impact that relationship as well. And it's very hard. So I want to name labor has been on the losing side for the last 40 years. Third premise. I was responsible for the title of this lecture series, this particular lecture. What was meant for evil? Right? Making AI work for us. It's a dramatic thing. Folks might recognize that it coming from Genesis 50. Genesis 50, for those who, within the people of the book traditions, Genesis 50 is the story of Joseph and his brothers, and particularly Genesis 50 to 15 to 21, Joseph reconciles with his brothers. And there's the line, in the King James, it's what you meant for evil, God has meant for good. But in other versions, it's what you meant for harm has been turned for something for good. So it's all about reconciliation. I have another premise to add on to that, but I just want to set the stage with these three premises. See if you agree, disagree, and challenge and push back. And we can work out where we go here.
Yeah, I love it. So, let's start, let me maybe start with the marketplace.
Yeah.
So the question of AI in the marketplace is actually one that I've been wrestling with for a while now. And, when I was at Stanford, we helped to launch their Institute for Human-Centered AI. And one of our core founding principles was that the cutting edge of AI was being driven primarily by market forces, and that would be unsatisfactory, that would be dangerous, that is not the future we would be aiming for. I think, and I hope that if you go back to the first series, the first lecture in this series, and in tonight's, pickups of pros and cons on the AI front, you're seeing that I think there's a lot more possibilities for AI than merely what the market offers. At Stanford, we were able to advocate for the US to put a large investment around research that would be for the public good. And there are a lot of things we do in society that aren't market-driven, a lot of things that governments do, that in particular need to not be market-driven, or else our bodies and many other things are going to suffer. We were able to get a huge investment in public interest AI through the work that we did there, but really around research in universities, where I'm spending a lot of my time now is working with nonprofits, religious and otherwise, and helping imagine a world in which AI is something more like beneficial AI. And again, if you go back to that first series, a lot of my examples were trying to push to all the good it can help us do in an embodied religious experience. Remember, it's the second thing I did after religious education was charity and relief services. Adding the YMCA, the community, the JCCs out there is an important part of religious practice. Now, where AI can support those things, you're really finding places where, where the market will have its limits if we choose to deploy AI in more beneficial ways that aren't necessarily market-driven. And let me just put a clear point on why the market-driven piece is so worrisome right now. So at this point, most of us have heard about large language models. And actually here again, twice in one night for The Economist. The Economist has done a good job the past couple of issues highlighting the scale at which new AI models need in terms of funding and other resources to even be launched. Our view at the time of launching the Stanford HAI was that there are only a handful of companies in the world who are able to do cutting edge technology and research in AI, and not even the top universities. So everything about the largest, most sophisticated AIs is right now coming out of the market. Organizations that are driven by obligation to be market driven, and that it's our task, and I think this is a real task, to find ways to make sure that other types of AI will thrive, find place, and can do the benefit along the way. The labor question is the live question. There, the story we tell on the labor front, and this is often a question when we're dealing with business leaders, but local governments in particular, because local governments have a lot of unions that we deal with, and a lot of labor that's organized. And so the range of possibilities that we often think about, the two canonical stories are, is AI a tractor, which did displace a lot of farm workers as a new technology, or is AI like an ATM, which we feared would displace bank tellers, but today there's actually more bank tellers than there were when the ATM was launched. So that AI has a range of possibilities, and probably there are going to be jobs and that will be replacing some tasks. There'll be some AIs that replace whole jobs. So labor will change, undoubtedly. It's a new technology reality. And the aggregation of that wealth, as it changes, is another major question. And that is a policy decision at this stage. That's a democracy question for those of us who live in democracies. It's not a nationalist question, it could be, I suppose. That's not a place that I often see the conversation. And so, the choices that we make going ahead are going to be really critical. But the clarity about AI replacing or putting labor at a further disadvantage, it's not as clear as we sit here today. And in fact, we often think about AI as being complementary to human expertise. And I think I mentioned in the very first section of the first series, of the first lecture, that we're still today seeing places where when you put the AI together with a human expert, you're getting much better outcomes. So that's actually helping labor, those of us on the labor side, to perform our tasks better, with better outcomes and the like. So I think the labor question is a little bit more mixed. The wealth question, I think, is robust, given the fact that cutting edge AI is just at that end of the scale already. And so those are government and those are policy decisions that we're going to have to make, investment-wise, taxation-wise, and the like.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for that. A couple words. State capture. So you name policy, you name government, these are democratic choices, and so on and so forth. Gotta say, I think it's fairly clear. As a matter of fact, there's a vice presidential debate going on, and I am sure both parties are trying to make the case that they're the ones to answer for the lopsided relationship between capital and labor in society right now. We have a solution, and there are very different solutions. And the conservative position tends to be much more free market, deregulation, with a little bit of nationalist tone to it, right? Tariffs and so on. The other side of the question is about keeping track of suffering. So this is why we teach theology like we do at PSR, because we're trying to keep track of the suffering of those. So I want to kind of get down to the ground a little bit. When you say policy choices and government and democracy and things like that, on the ground, the corporate implementation of AI is overwhelming. Dean Abraham last week talked about the cultural and religious influences it has. Let me stop there. So state capture, can you say?
Yeah, I think so. Where I'll pick up is on the observing of suffering and the alleviation of suffering. For me, you see the fundamental principle for me is that domination reduction. You see that other-centeredness. You're beginning. If you hadn't picked up on it in earlier parts of the series, I think you should. You might have well inferred that that for me, that ability to address suffering, to identify suffering, to help people get through it is an essential piece here. If my answer eventually I didn't also just flag that for you. And so, I give, rush through the example of, say, LA County right now working with AI tools to help identify folks who are on the cusp of becoming unhoused in ways that were not possible under pre-AI technologies or human alone analysis. I hold that type of example up as an extraordinary example of where we could be pushing here to watch the suffering, to identify the suffering, to prevent the suffering. Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons to be worried about AI on our phones. The greatest technology in the world is helping us click ads, right? To be able to paraphrase, one critic warrior about AI technologies. And it can help us identify the causes of becoming unhoused beforehand. And it can help us better identify cancers and sicknesses. And it can help us better deploy mental health resources in the community just by reading social media feeds in a world in which we're desperate for mental health caregivers. We have limited resources, and suddenly we're able to unlock ways to provide the balm, to alleviate the suffering, to help people through some of their hardest things, and that's being unlocked because AI technologies can do those good things too. And so, state capture, bigger, related, happy to go back there if you want. Again, for me, I think, the observation about the suffering piece is the piece that I really want anyone listening to really be walking out here with, saying, AI can really help us on that essential human mission.
If we're able to grasp it in a way that you feel is possible, you clearly feel it's possible, to grasp AI as a tool. Right? It's a tool. It seems as if you really, you're doubling down on that. It's a tool that can help us do all these things, alleviate suffering and so on and so forth. Okay, so that brings us to the third premise and even the fourth. What was meant evil can be made for good. The idea in the Joseph story, it goes through three phases. Verses 15 to 21, Genesis 50. First, Joseph and his brothers see the relationship that's distorted, and the first thing they do is weep. The first thing they do is weep. Right? Recognizing something has been broken. So that suggests vulnerability, and I want to ask a question about where you think AI can help cultivate vulnerability to begin to heal, to move in the direction you're talking about. Gotta say, I'm not sure I'm convinced entirely about this, but I understand. I appreciate that. Second part is to understand and restore a right relationship. Right? So AI is a tool, and I'm wondering how you think all of us can help capture or restore, recapture AI away from the market forces that currently promote it. Just to say, and you know these numbers, better than government, non-defense government spending on AI is paltry when it compared to private sector business spending, which is like, what is it, $1 trillion supposed to be a year or something like that? Within this year? Maybe, it might reach that. So that's a very lopsided thing. Okay. And then the third thing that happens in that series, in that story, is for the preservation of life. Now, this is where I can agree with you on the pluralism, right? For the preservation of life is why, in the story, God restores the relationship, takes what was harmful and makes it good. So that principle,
So I love the image that the first thing they did was weep.
Yeah.
So, for me, one of my most traumatic memories or standout memories on the AI democracy, on the religion democracy front that flagged already, was the 9/11. Right? I was teaching religion in a Catholic school to a bunch of middle schoolers, and let me tell you, everything scrapped. All lesson plans were on hold for weeks upon weeks. Because immediately the task there is to have the weeping, to help through the process, to help understand, to help process the trauma, the discussion, the whys, the news, all of this. For me, and this will reflect President Vasquez-Levy's reference to religion and AI as technologies. For me, this is an example, and for many of us, of the technology of religion being used for ill. I would add, and I hope that today, if you go back and read the lecture or think about how I framed it, I would add democracy to that technology list. So if we'll take the premise that religion is a type of technology to help us understand the world, if AI is more clearly understood as that, I would add democracy to that as a way that we choose to organize. And in each of those cases, we find ways in which it could be meant for you. And our task, if we choose it, you don't have to, is to turn each of those, my charge is to turn each of those things toward the benefit, towards the good, and away from the evil. To do the conversion piece that Genesis 50 passage says it so well. It was meant for evil. God has made it good. We call it God. We can debate on what that means in that moment. But I think that's true for each of those three principal topics really for the series, for AI, for religion, and for democracy, good or ill, and that's for us.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let's see what folks think about that. Whether the choice is ours, because I want to be convinced, but I remain a little bit more skeptical. I want to push further into how AI limits our choices. And in some ways really does not provide the kind of vulnerability that will allow us to make better choices. But let's see if there are questions. We can turn down to that phase. And again, if you have questions, please raise them up. So I'll just say, as we're gathering, okay, fantastic, okay. So you can see the question here. Yeah, why do you think both narratives have thrived? I think yeah. Well, you often hear that the U.S. is a melting pot. You also hear that the U.S. was founded on the principles of Christianity. Why do you think both narratives have thrived? And I want to focus on the word narrative. That's for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think narrative is the key there, right? We tell stories about how we came to be. And there's a version of the U.S. founding that has us being more founded on something that a lot of diversity of Christianity is, probably some other religious freedoms in there, Maryland, Rhode Island, and others. But it's a story that we tell, right? And it will end up being the same type of question around how to use these technologies. Each of the three we just talked about will end up being the stories that we tell about how they're possible, what their possibilities are, who controls them, what we want to do with them. Same way, what do we want to do with U.S. legacy? Are we going to, first of all, I already want to question the idea of looking at the past necessarily as overly helpful. There are a lot of things at the founding that I wouldn't want carrying forward. So the idea of narrative here is only so informative. I know we all rest in some tradition. We all come to the world as it was created before us, and then we help co-create along the way. But I think, because those stories help inform what we want to be, would be my look at these two most often. But actually, this would be a great thing for you to maybe also comment on too. So I don't want to look at the founding as necessarily prescriptive for what we want to be going ahead. I'm very skeptical about tradition for a lot of reasons. Again, I just gestured to the idea that there are a lot of things in the founding I wouldn't want to continue. And I think for each generation, there's really an opportunity for us to relook and question what we've inherited and what we want to change going forward. So I'm as interested, I'm interested in this type of question for what it means for people who are telling the stories at the given moment. And then for us, I think the challenge is what story are we going to tell going forward? What world do we want to create going ahead? And that's where, that's maybe where I'm pushing on, I think, the legitimate concerns about market capture, about AI being, dollars driven, capital driven, and so on. It's like, okay, that's the world we inherited, and we are at a moment where we have an opportunity to relook at that if we're able. That's a movement, that's organization, that's a lot of effort, and many of us are busy. Yeah. So the odds.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
Yeah,
the odds are it's an uphill. But it's an uphill because that's the world we inherited, and then where will we put our efforts, going ahead?
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think you're right. I mean, well, first of all, to this question, there has always been a tension in the American enterprise and the American experiment between, sort of, shall we say, ruling class narratives and things like that, and also looking backwards versus looking forwards, right? The segregation as the default response, and we are in a phase moving from segregation to now desegregation, trying to figure out what that means and whether we stay there versus integration. See, so melting pot ideas is something along the lines of desegregation and so on and so forth, but both these narratives are part of the U.S. experiment. And the point about narrative, though, for me and for us, and what we do here at this institution, is to keep track. Narratives are the way we care for people. Story listening and storytelling are how we keep track and trace out the effects of various voices in the society on people. So can I just throw in something real quick?
I just want to say, I not only agree, but I hope that in my version of pluralism, in describing the expansive discursive mode and the inclusion of various types of speech and narrative, that you're also seeing that not only do I agree, but I think it's essential to the right type of democracy, that we are allowing those types of narratives, those stories, that healing, that connection to multiply. That this public space allows for that in a way that I think classical liberalism didn't in its exclusionary nature of religion. So not only do I agree, but I hope it's an essential piece of how we experience the political.
Right now, there are two people debating in contest for the next presidency. One of them has a book called Hillbilly Elegy, and in the last line, just want to offer this to you, we're going to move to the question, of chapter 13, he talks about needing help, J.D. Vance, and then he doesn't. His policies now don't reflect. His policy prescriptions do not reflect that kind of vulnerability. So I just want to name just about the power of how difficult it is to make that choice that you're talking about, which I agree is necessary. What is the impact of AI voting? How does AI contribute to or solve polarization?
Yeah. So, okay. I think that the contributor solve on polarization, I think that's a mixed bag. So I hope I presented it as a mixed bag, in prepared remarks already. I hope that will resonate with what's going ahead. So, the emerging research I just flagged from Science this month suggests that AI can help, move away from some extremist views, and that's something that if that proves to be replicable and something that that we see elsewhere, that could help us move in a less polarizing direction on one front. AI, and then of course, all the words that Abraham and others identify, will have easily identified as AI helping in the algorithms and social media feeds and helping us with balkanization, in that we all end up in our own echo chambers. And oh, by the way, the communications research suggests that even though we live in our own echo chambers, and when we try and go out and see more on social media of other points of view that actually ends up confirming our biases, our original positions, so that it's counterintuitive, where I want to see what the other side is saying or what other folks are saying, but then it entrenches us in the end. And so that, what seems to, at this moment, be most useful for moving folks off of polarized view are more deep engagements. And that may not be AI's problem to solve in the end. It's exacerbating, it has a possibility based on this, this one study that I flagged today. But in the end, there are really some deep conversations. And again, if you go back to some examples that I used in the first lecture, you'll have, the ability to be immersively educated, to have conversations with folks who aren't like us, imagining or real through translation, imagining in a fictionalized world, that AI can help us with, where we can, build sympathies. And, those who are doing the research right now on the VR world, the virtual worlds, what we find is that that type of immersive experience that AI can help us create can help us alter our points of view, have a longer duration of more firmly held new convictions along the way, new beliefs, so not just a conversion experience in some ways, but also a durability of new practices or new ways of thinking. So AI's got some options there. Is that going to be the magic bullet, the help button? I think it's part of the toolkit. For me, it's part of the toolkit. But right now, the communications research suggests that it's really more deep engagement with folks who are of different perspectives and a natural sense of curiosity that really help folks decrease the polarization. I could also note that there are forms of democracy that look like they create less polarized citizenry than the majority rule, first past the post model that we largely deploy in the United States. And many communities, including the Bay Area, are experimenting with ranked choice voting and the like, which generally is said to move citizenry more towards moderation away from polarization. So there again, AI may not be the only or even the primary tool, though it's got some contributions to make too.
Okay, and then we also have how may AI be used in political peace building in the Middle East and elsewhere.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Why not, since we're on the solve all the problems.
Exactly. Okay. So the peace building process is an interesting one. So first of all, I think I just flagged again conversations, real and imagined. I just flagged translations. In the first lecture on religious education and interfaith dialogue, I flagged that AI can help us learn more about other perspectives. Like I also flagged peace missions, so peace buildings of a different order, but peace monitoring when there are agreements. AI on the drones can help us monitor where troops are and food's making it on the right places, humanitarian pauses and the like. There's a lot that can be done on the education side, on the interfaith side. There's some that can be done as well on the logistics side around real peace building, real impacts of war and conflict. Here again, does it solve the problem? No. Could it be a powerful tool? If it continues to be a place where people can be moved from deeply held, polarizing or deeply rooted views or gain compassion or gain understanding. Yeah, it's part of the toolkit. Here again, it's part of the toolkit. It's not probably going to be the silver bullet, but boy, it can be useful. There are a lot. The experts in interfaith dialogue or in peace building that would be required to do this across a region or a society, that's just an immense number of person power with a range of expertise and capabilities in the end. That an AI system that's doing better than the mean could be deployed more broadly, could be better than your average individual clergy member, conversation partner, etc., or could be partnered with along the way. So I think if I am a philanthropist or if I'm a government looking for something in this space, I think that's an interesting area of research, and I can see a lot of projects based on what the technologies are today, set aside all the things that may be around the corner as well. Some of which
Flag, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and I love the mention of the word tool and toolkit. I think that's where the resolution and reconciliation can happen, the restoration of relationship between AI and us human beings. It's a tool, all right? But we live in a market society. So this is kind of a question to that point. Technology is not neutral. AI is not neutral. One could argue that true neutrality is impossible.
Yeah.
So why is this claim of AI neutrality widely adopted?
Yeah, I love this. I love this question. I have real skepticism around AI neutrality as well. In fact, here again in the first lecture, you may recall that I specifically flagged that AI could become this oracle, this neutral oracle with all wisdom. But it's probably as likely, I would say probably more likely, if I'm a betting person, that we end up in competing versions of AI that are taught to give certain kinds of responses. We see this right now with inside China, inside the authoritarian context, where your LLMs better not be giving the same answers as Claude or ChatGPT, right? They better be giving the party line, or else it doesn't pass muster. So I think the idea of AI neutrality, I hope, is not widely adopted. And B, that's where we do a lot of research into these large models in particular, if they're released, to see how accurate they are, to see what biases they contain, etc. And that's an ongoing research project. Is that something that every AI tool that you use in your life over the next 2 decades, there's going to be research to show how neutral it is? Almost impossible. So it's a big project chasing neutrality there. So I think that's a world that may feel very familiar to us.
So pushing back on the example of beneficial AI you mentioned, we currently do not have the technology to observe social media users, but we use that surveillance for marketing purposes to make more money. Okay, everybody, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Will this iteration of AI be used for good or a motivating factor?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about, the beneficial AI moniker is something that the nonprofit alliance in Washington, D.C. we picked up as an alliance. We're starting to pick up as an alliance to try out. Pulled from actually a fundraising organization that helps nonprofits fundraise, philanthropists meet causes and organizations that they care about. It's aspirational. It's asking us to be thinking in that direction. The surveillance realities. Oh boy. I mean, I've said it multiple times, right? That is very real. And again, it was real before the current crop of AI technologies. For 15, 20 years, there have been really good AI machine learning, algorithms that have helped on this front for surveillance reasons and the like. I think I said at the film screening, I reminded folks that it's been many years since Mark Zuckerberg flagged that you did not have to be a member of Facebook for them, their data folks, to be able to identify what your political views are, what you're likely to vote, or your political preferences are likely to be, because they have so much information from other folks. AI only makes that type of surveillance and predictive nature more likely in the hands of those companies that know how to use it. I mean, I think surveillance has been around for a while at this point. But data privacy folks tell us that data privacy is calling years. So I think this is a legitimate concern.
Yeah, okay. No, fair enough. Curious about your thoughts on AI and the issue of continued automation as raised by the longshoremen currently on strike. Is there a way to reshape their narrative of lost job security? Again, labor, losing out to capital.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, one of my colleagues worked on the congressional study for this in 2019, which really looks at jobs. So every job has a certain number of tasks, only, and depending on the job, some of those will be automated, some of those can be automated by an AI, some can't. By the way, I would not look at that 2019 study today. AI has moved too far, too fast. So, that would be revised going ahead. But yeah, we should expect a fair amount of continued automation. By the way, I want a lot of automation a lot more automation in my life. I want something like Iron Man's Friday, or his assistant, which is more agent. What the current technology folks are describing as agent-based technologies, that I can tell my phone to go schedule me, get my wife and I dinner tomorrow night and make sure that our favorite bottle of wine is waiting for us. I don't drink wine. We don't go out much, but you get it. These are things that I would love more automation. I would love more automation in my job. I don't need somebody. I don't need all those emails going back and forth on our calendar. Let's just have AI be able to do it. There are tons of things that I want automated. I imagine if we put together a list for each of us, what things that you would want automated. Your dishes, your cleaning, and the like. That's very much on the horizon here.
Okay.
All right. One of my favorite quotes on this era of AI is complaining about AI doing art and doing writing, but not doing the dishes and laundry. Hey, look, what I really want is AI to do dishes and laundry so that I can do art and writing, not have the AI do the writing. So there are a lot of things in automation that we want personally and in work. Now, I think the question of labor displacement and worker displacement, again, requires a concerted policy response. If it's going to function, which, by the way, sadly, my understanding of research is it rarely goes smoothly. So, I don't know where jobs are going to be automated out. I'm not overly optimistic there, but that's just based on past history. It could be different than we had.
Just want to say that if we don't do the dishes and laundry, what are the poets going to write about? So, that's, see what I'm saying? So be careful. I mean, of course, the classic H.G. Wells and the story of the Morlock and Eloy and Eloy, these blobs that don't do anything, and because everything's been done for them. So, of course, all right.
I know the Star Trek version, but that's
the Star Trek. Okay,
two Star Trek references.
No, I love Star Trek, and so to that point, actually, talk about the future and exploration. Isn't AI an arms race, right? How do you make sure that good ideas win when we both have the most powerfully persuasive tools competing against each other?
Yeah. Yes, AI is an arms race. Yes, I wish it weren't for all reasons of taking resources, capital, energy consumption concerns. I think, those of us who saw Oppenheimer there may recall that line where Oppenheimer, recall the line from the film where Oppenheimer says, it's not that I want to build the bomb, but if there's going to be a bomb, I want to make sure we have it. I think there's a legitimate analogy here on the AI front with regard to the arms race, that we darn well better stay ahead on the national security front, or else that's not good news for us. Certainly in an increasingly multipolar world. That's my national security hat for a second. Sorry. And yeah, but then from there, the large companies are absolutely, the largest companies are absolutely fighting for AI, because right now the cutting edge of technologies, and this is what ChatGPT, this is what these large models are intended to be. They're intended to be, and again, I said this in the first series and passed me briefly, they're intended to be foundational, upon which all subsequent AI models will then be built or tweaked. So right now the battle is for what's the underlying core model that will win the day, that we can then turn into, the consoler, who can turn into the laundry maker, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's an arms race that you're not going to get companies to back away from. That is a keystone technology. It is Apple and Microsoft from a few decades ago. That is going to happen. Ensuring that we find investment opportunities or ways in which those beneficial AI models to still see the light of day. I think that's the work that the market may not solve alone and may require additional coming in. So that's a national security answer, that's a big market answer, and then that's a call to action on the beneficial dimensions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Maybe as well, can you talk about, because this lecture is framed around, making AI work for us for a change, right? Work for us. And so I think you've hinted at this throughout the evening, but I just want to ask maybe more pointedly, how can AI help labor organize in such a way that it can tell its stories of vulnerability, its narratives of vulnerability, gain power being, discussion with capital, and pull back some of those things?
Yeah, well, I think right now, I mean, there are tools right now, even in imperfect AI models that we read about, where you can have a collection of stories. So you could even take a smaller version of that big democratic policy engagement tool that I described tonight in Taiwan and elsewhere, where you could have, you could have storytelling into a model that can aggregate, that can summarize, that can analyze, that can make policy recommendations, at least first drafts of them, and have them really bring down the cost for a lot of that, bring down the opportunity, challenges, and barriers for that. That's an example set. I'm not overly optimistic, and I don't think we ought to be, that it's going to not replace a bunch of jobs. It's going to happen. Which ones? I think that's the open question right now that we're wrestling with. And the folks sitting across from, your organization, we're in negotiation, are going to have the same kind of tools. They're going to have access as well. So AI is going to be on both sides of that table, both sides of that ledger, if I can go right to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and because of the market capture that you're describing, you can presume that there's probably an imbalance in that access for the moment. The hope, the ask, the encouragement here is that we have an opportunity to lessen that imbalance and allow, greater access for uses that we would think are more positive. However, I think that, if we're not overly optimistic, that's probably a reasonable thing at this stage. Okay, that's a dour note to end on.
No, it's not. We're not even in. Matter of fact, we're not going to end. We're not going to end there. We're not going to end there. Curious about the freedom component of democratic pluralism. I am concerned that religious institutions, even if operating in isolation, without access to political power, can still harm people. Should pluralistic states articulate a baseline set of rights that no religion can violate? And how can states articulate the inception and intersections of sexuality and religion?
Yeah, I love this question. I love this question for a lot of reasons. One is, I think one is I've wrestled with it for a long time. So the idea of a politically pluralist democracy restraining itself and not stepping in to fix or adjust or require some pretty nasty practices, I think is a hard pill for many of us to swallow, is what I'll say. I'll also say it's the world we live in many ways. Today, you may not be happy about it, which would be understandable, but suddenly if you end up in a world where you're forcing Catholics to ordain women, that seems like a pretty nasty world to live in. And yet it may mean that we have, white Christian nationalist communities that are pretty darn racist and sexist and other along those ways. I guess I worry about the alternative more of of the state coming in and forcing communities of free association to change practices that we don't like. That feels very much in the same ballpark as nationalism. However, I want to be very clear that I think that's really hard for those of us who are more sympathetic to a liberal or tolerant or pluralistic society in a robust sense beyond the political. And yet, what am I going to do? Am I going to start, sending in citizen police brigades into communities? Maybe you want to do that, by the way. That also seems like a reasonable thing because it doesn't have the power of the state behind it. You could probably, make an argument for that. I'm not advocating for that. Yeah, I think this is absolutely one, to my mind, one of the hardest things, and I worry about the alternatives. And yeah, there are some base rights like children, consent, things that you would only want after age 18 that I think are part of acknowledging that sort of live within that world of equality in the end, and freedom. But even today, you know, we often see those practices, you know, varied, and the laws that exist in this country and in other democracies today are haphazard. Right? We might, you know, not want, you know, female genital alteration in many places, but we allow male genital alteration before 18 in life. There's religious histories and interesting worlds there that some of the rights folks want to really press against. So it's an ongoing debate set, but yeah, I'm really nervous about the tolerance police, either by the state or figuring out what makes sense without the power of the state too, because you still have mobs outside of the political realm. And how do we feel about that? You know, I think there's reasons to be worried about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to see if there's anything else. We're just about out of time. Just want to, one more. Okay. How does AI affect or exacerbate the wealth gap? Yeah, no, and I appreciate your trying to solve all the problems.
All the problems.
Defending AI.
There we go. Yeah, you know, okay, so a few things. First of all, again, in as much as it allows us to, you know, to better educate, to get better health care, things like this, there's a lot of ways in which the personal and the life circumstances that lead to, I'll say, start at the bottom scale, which, you know, I'm more familiar with it, with which I do a lot of work. AI can help folks move up the social scale in many ways, but I think the gap is a real question because the top keeps moving up, right? I mean, this has been the problem in the United States and in other modern democracies, that the gap is as much that the top is just moving, the top of the grades are moving so much higher and faster, and even in an era, past few years, where we've seen, you know, at the lower end of the economic spectrum in the U.S., some gains, it's nowhere near where the top is. So the gap, you know, I just presume that the gap will continue to grow, again, until policy or taxation plans change. AI can really open some opportunities, though, at the lower ends of the economic scale. You know, the beneficial AI examples I've given, I hope I've given you just a glimpse into that. But I would expect, you know, based on, I think, what you rightly underscored, there are going to be many billionaires made from this AI world at the top. So, you know, the gap grows, and those of us, you know, and those of us who we care about, and those who we work with at the lower ends of the scale have opportunities too, and, you know, can benefit from this technology. And I hope that's really, again, I hope you've heard it now. I hope that's really a push.
I have heard it. I want to thank you for that as a tool. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Leonard, for a great conversation. I have to say, the richness of the conversation over the last couple of weeks as the themes begin to blend together has just been really remarkable. Thank you for the conversations. To all of you who participated, both in person and online, and your questions that have enriched our discussion, I want to encourage you to reach out to us as well with questions or comments you have as we head into our last session. And next week, we'd love to be able to kind of see what's in your mind, what are you thinking, what are your comments, so that as we prepare for our final conversation next week, we are able to do that. I want to invite you to visit psr.edu, the website for our institution here at PSR. There's a number of other lecture series we are running this fall that are seeking to engage the conversations that are shaping this political moment. We have a series going on from our Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion entitled Queering the Vote, and it's looking at different aspects from our various roundtables, ethnic-specific roundtables around how we engage in the political process. Also, we have a series on migration, social boundaries, and border crossing, and the ancient world by our Berkeley Museum, which is an archaeological collection here at PSR, and it's a series of lectures on Thursday mornings as well. So you can find out more about that at psr.edu. We will, again, be back together next week on Tuesday, October 8th for a final session. Invite you to come early if you are in person to join us for a reception at 5:30, followed at 6:30 by our final lecture. And thank you again for your time. We do have some dessert and wines if you are here in person and want to join us for a little bit and visit a bit more with both of our presenters. Please join me in giving them one more round of applause. Thank you.